It started as an ordinary flight, passengers boarding, finding their seats, and the faint hum of the engines filling the cabin. Among them was Lisa, a young black woman traveling for work, seated quietly in economy class. She kept to herself, scrolling through her phone as the flight crew bustled about. But something was off. From the moment she boarded, the flight attendant's tone toward her felt unusually cold, curt responses, a dismissive glare, and an air of indifference that didn't go unnoticed by the passengers around her. Lisa tried to brush it off, convincing herself it was nothing, but the tension escalated when she politely requested a simple favor, a gesture routinely extended to other passengers. Instead of help, she was met with a harsh refusal and an almost deliberate act of public humiliation. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin as fellow travelers exchanged uneasy glances. Just when it seemed like Lisa's voice would go unheard, a commanding presence stepped in, the pilot himself. What could have prompted him to leave the cockpit mid-flight? And how would his intervention shift the dynamic on this tense journey? Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave everyone, including you, stunned. The cabin fell silent as the pilot, a tall man with a calm but firm demeanor, approached Lisa's seat. His presence alone commanded attention, and even the flight attendant, who had seemed so sure of herself moments ago, looked visibly uneasy. Passengers leaned in, their curiosity piqued as they watched the scene unfold. What could have possibly drawn the pilot out of the cockpit at this moment? Lisa glanced up, startled by his unexpected arrival. She hadn't complained or caused a scene. She simply wanted the same respect shown to others. But now, with all eyes on her, she couldn't help but feel a wave of discomfort. The pilot addressed her with a warm, professional tone, instantly creating a stark contrast to the earlier interaction. He asked her a few questions, clearly trying to understand the situation. Lisa explained briefly, careful not to let her emotions spill over, though the hurt in her voice was unmistakable. The flight attendant stood nearby, shifting nervously, trying to explain herself. But something in the pilot's expression hinted that he wasn't convinced by her excuses. The tension was palpable. Passengers whispered quietly, wondering what the pilot would do next. His next words would change everything. The pilot's gaze shifted between Lisa and the flight attendant, his expression unreadable but serious. He calmly asked Lisa to recount what had happened, his tone patient and professional. Lisa hesitated for a moment, aware that everyone around her was listening. She spoke quietly, recounting how she had been ignored, spoken down to, and refused a simple request that had been granted to others. As she spoke, murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers nodded in agreement, having witnessed the interaction themselves. Others whispered in disbelief, wondering how such behavior could occur in this day and age. The flight attendant's nervousness grew more evident with each passing second. She began to stammer out an explanation, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But her words sounded hollow, and the pilot didn't seem convinced. Meanwhile, in the rows behind Lisa, a family quietly discussed what they had seen, while a businessman tapped furiously on his laptop, possibly documenting the unfolding events. A young girl sitting by the window watched the pilot with wide eyes, whispering to her mother, "Is he going to fire her?" Lisa's heart pounded as she waited for what would happen next. The pilot turned to the flight attendant and said something no one expected. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as the pilot addressed the flight attendant. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Let's step aside for a moment," he said, motioning for her to follow him toward the galley. Passengers exchanged glances, their curiosity building. Even those who had been lost in books or movies were now fully engaged, eager to see how this would unfold. Lisa sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could hear snippets of the low conversation between the pilot and the flight attendant, their voices just out of reach. A few rows away, a man whispered to his seatmate, "I've never seen a pilot leave the cockpit for something like this." Another passenger, a woman with a kind face, leaned over to Lisa and said softly, "I'm so sorry this is happening to you." It's not right. Minutes felt like hours as the tension thickened. The flight attendant eventually returned, her face pale and her posture stiff. The pilot followed closely behind, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I need your attention for an important announcement." The passengers straightened in their seats, their eyes fixed on the pilot as his voice resonated through the cabin. "It's come to my attention," he began, pausing briefly, "that one of our team members has not upheld the standards of respect and professionalism we expect on this flight." A ripple of surprise spread through the cabin. No one had anticipated such a direct acknowledgement. The flight attendant stood frozen nearby, her eyes darting nervously. Passengers murmured, some leaning toward the aisle to catch every word. Lisa's breath caught as she glanced around, unsure of where this was heading. The pilot continued, "We take situations like this very seriously. While I regret any discomfort caused, I assure you it will be addressed." But just as the passengers thought they had a grasp of the situation, the unexpected happened. A man from first class stood up and called out, "I saw the whole thing from up front. This isn't just about respect, it's about discrimination." The words hung heavy in the air, and gasps echoed through the cabin. The pilot turned toward the man, his expression tightening. This new revelation shifted the energy entirely, raising the stakes for everyone involved. What would happen next? The air was thick with anticipation. The cabin was silent, every passenger hanging on the unfolding drama. The pilot faced the man from first class, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Thank you for speaking up," he said. "If anyone else witnessed this interaction, I encourage you to share what you saw." To Lisa's surprise, several hands went up. Passengers began to voice their observations, describing the dismissive tone and unkind treatment Lisa had endured. Each account added weight to the moment, leaving no room for doubt. The flight attendant stood frozen, her face pale as the walls seemed to close in. The pilot took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the cabin. "I want to assure everyone on this flight that we do not tolerate discrimination of any kind," he said. "In light of this, I've made a decision." The cabin seemed to hold its breath as the flight attendant was quietly escorted away to the back of the plane. The passengers murmured in astonishment, but just as relief began to settle, the pilot approached Lisa. "Miss Taylor," he said warmly, "I'd like to personally invite you to join us in first class for the remainder of the flight." Lisa was stunned, but the twist didn't end there. As she made her way forward, the man who had spoken up revealed himself to be an executive from the airline. He smiled at Lisa and said, "We'll be reaching out to you soon. This isn't over." The cabin erupted in applause as Lisa took her seat in first class, finally feeling seen and respected. As Lisa settled into her seat in first class, the overwhelming emotions began to sink in. The kindness of strangers, the courage of those who spoke up, and the unexpected intervention of the airline executive had transformed what began as a humiliating experience into something empowering. She glanced around, catching supportive smiles from passengers who had been rooting for her. For the first time since boarding, she felt like she belonged. The rest of the flight went smoothly. The pilot, true to his word, checked in with Lisa personally before landing, ensuring she was comfortable and reassuring her that steps were being taken to address the situation. The airline executive discreetly handed her his card, promising a follow-up. "Your voice matters," he said, his tone genuine. When the plane touched down, passengers filed out, many stopping to wish Lisa well or express their support. As she stepped off the jet bridge, her heart felt lighter. What started as an isolating moment had brought a sense of community, proving that even in moments of adversity, compassion can shine through. Later, Lisa reflected on the experience. It wasn't just about her treatment, it was about standing up for what was right and inspiring others to do the same. Her story, once filled with frustration and hurt, had become a powerful reminder of the importance of speaking up and supporting one another. It was a flight she would never forget, not for the conflict, but for the way it ended, with hope and dignity restored.